Welcome to Objects of Desire,
the podcast in which we talk about the things that mean the most to us.
or tell us who we are, where we came from, or where we're heading. I'm Naz Nazawa.
And I'm Tony Freund.
Every episode, we invite a guest to share the stories behind their one special thing, valued not for its price tag, but for its beauty, craftsmanship, quirkiness, and especially for the ways it connects them to the world.
Today, we are joined by Wendy Goodman and Jerry Saltz.
Wendy is the influential and beloved design editor of New York Magazine, as well as the author of The World of Gloria Vanderbilt and May I Come In? She's talking about a small ebony box carved by a 20th century French design great.
And Jerry is the Pulitzer Prize-winning senior art critic for New York Magazine and Vulture, as well as the author of How to Be an Artist and Art is Life. He joins us today to talk about an animal skull he found outside Marfa, Texas.
We are so excited to have them with us today to discuss their objects of desire.
I am totally thrilled to have you two here. I think, Naz, you flew all the way in from San Francisco.
I did. I wouldn't miss it. Two New York icons and a third as well.
You're good. We have Jerry Saltz and Wendy Goodman here, and we are going to talk about the objects that you desire. I am not only a fan of your individual work, but I love the fact that you two are at New York Magazine doing the things that very few people still do, which is basically saying it as you see it. And I think in this day of influencers, you two are showing how important it is to actually be authentic in the things that you love.
And neither of us have been able to monetize it.
Yeah.
We don't know how.
Jerry, really?
And the truth is, Wendy and I talk about this regularly. It may be the only way for writers to be read, listened to have quote unquote influence. So, we're doing it out of necessity and idiocy, I would say, and just holding on.
Well, I will say the model is broken if you two can't monetize it.
To counter Jerry's point, maybe, we both are passionate for what we do and love what we do. Mm-hmm. And it, as I always say, if I talk to students or young professionals, I say, what will give you energy is your passion. Mm-hmm. If you're just doing something in a half-hearted way, you won't have energy. But if you are passionate and determined and won't give up, and we both are really lucky that we get to do what we do now, because it's an exciting time, it's a challenging time. But, I just love New York Magazine. I love my work. I love my colleagues. And to get out every day on the subway and explore is just a gift. It really is.
What Wendy said.
Well, you're both exemplified the best of New York, and I love that you're out there. I think New York loves you both back.
I was going to say, if love is currency and admiration is coin, then this is a room filled with a whole lot of something. Because,
so nice.
We're fans. And, yeah.
Take that with you in your monetization. Yeah. All right. So what's really fun about this podcast is seeing what you are going to bring as your object of desire. So, Wendy, maybe let's start with what you brought.
Well, I brought an Alexandre Noël box that I bought in Paris. Pierre Passepartout at that time had a gallery and I forget what it's called, but it was right near the Tuileries. Mm-hmm. Tuileries. Should be able to pronounce that. Anyway, I went into that gallery and I saw this little box, and prior to that, wandering around Paris, I had been down to, I guess I was at House and Garden, maybe, because I was at House and Garden twice. It might have been, I can't remember the first or second time, but I went into the gallery 1950 on Lafayette Street, and Christina Grajales was there, working there, and she said, Wendy, I have something really special to show you. I had never heard of Alexandre Noël. She showed me some of his sculptures, and I became completely obsessed because I had never seen wood worked like that. He worked with wood as if the wood were clay. This little ebony box feels like a piece of satin. It is so beautiful. And what I felt that day with her was I must get to the source of this artist, which led me in 2007, when I was in Paris, through Christina, to meet Alexandra Knoll's daughter, Odile. And my obsession was to go to the source, to go to his house that Odile still lived in and see where he made these. So he had died not that long ago. And even more miraculous was that the house and his studio was completely intact. So I could go and stand in the studio, see all of his tools, see pieces of wood he was working on when he died. And I thought, this is it. I was so proud that I could go to the source, because what I realized in my obsession with certain things that led me to many of the stories I did, I need to get to the most primal place of that artist or designer. I need to breathe the air they breathed. And I can't always get there, but I get as close as I can, which has led me to many places literally around the world, because I just won't. I have to be there. I have to see where they were and what they were looking at and what they were touching. And I think the thing about objects and what this whole podcast is about, the history of an object, where it's been, who made it, who touched it, all of that history is somehow resonant for me, and I think so many people, as opposed to something that's manufactured and it's not really been touched by the human hand. The art of the hand and is something I think human beings need, like they need hugs and they need, affection. There's affection in these pieces because somebody took the time to work them and to love them. And so I couldn't really afford that box at that time, but I thought I will never have the opportunity again to buy an Alexandra Knoll piece ever, because I'd never seen a small piece. So I thought, well, I'll just be late with my rent. I won't eat. I won't go to the theater. I'll do what I have to do to buy this. And, you only regret the things you didn't
That's
get.
right.
You never regret the things you got. Even if you couldn't afford them, you find a way.
What year was it when you found the box?
2007.
Oh.
Oh, wow.
you said
Oh,
that.
no, I'm sorry. I think 2007 was the year that I went to the studio and met with
Yeah.
Odile. So I bought that box way before that.
That's what I'm
So
wondering.
I can't remember the year, but I know Pierre Passepartout does not have that gallery anymore.
Okay.
He closed that
Wow.
a while
That's wild.
back.
So when you go to the source, what drives you, what motivates you, like the photos that you choose to include? Because in your book,
Right.
May I Come In?
Right.
There is a photo of the studio.
Yes.
And you included
Yes.
one where there's cobwebs. Which,
Yes.
Is that kind of to convey that it had just stayed completely at rest since
it
his
was
passing?
to convey that since his death, it had not been disturbed.
Wow.
And the thing that just moved me so much was that, he might have been out back getting another tool for the way that the studio was,
right.
because Odile had literally kept it. And then outside there were pieces of wood that he literally was sort of, he might have had a heart attack right in the studio for all I know, because it was in process. It wasn't a dead space, which often studios are dead spaces. This was alive. And that cobweb to me showed, there's still stuff going on here. Spiders are making cobwebs and nobody is disturbing them. That was important.
I had a similar experience also, I think, thanks to Christina Grajales. Shout out to Christina.
Yes.
Where I went out to Bucks County to George Nakashima's
Oh,
studio,
yes.
and Mira
Oh,
took me
gosh.
around
Yes.
probably about the same time.
Yeah.
And going into the shed where the slabs of wood were that George himself had selected, even though he had gone. I've never sort of approached or looked at a Nakashima piece in the same way since seeing that. Your box is a beautiful object, intrinsically beautiful, but it's so much more for you.
Right.
And changes. Before we go into your object, you've talked about that, the way that the way we appreciate things change all the time, and we're sort of filtering or looking at things through this sort of filter of 1,000 other things.
Well, like when Wendy probably looks at that beautiful object or touches it. When I touched it, it was really silky, like slip. It was just an amazing physical experience. But my guess is For Wendy, it brings her back to that primal moment and then opens up backwards to looking for its source and forwards to like carrying it with her through her life, the good times, the bad, like forget, whatever. But I think art and objects are very much alive, is all you're hearing from Wendy and all you're sort of saying that, and we love that. Or we don't seem to be able to live without them. We keep accumulating them, and the dopey minimalists who tell us to get rid of everything, and they don't get rid of everything. They're following a sense of design, or of objecthood, or of space, or presence, or something. So, whatever the latest trend is.
Yeah. I mean, all of my minimalist clients, I just really hide a lot of storage everywhere. They
Yeah.
all have stuff.
Exactly.
They just don't want to see the stuff all
Yeah,
the time.
exactly.
But it's all there.
It's there.
And their idea of perfection is very, and sometimes Wendy and I have talked about this, quite generic, frankly,
Yeah.
where I want to be generically minimal, where if Wendy's object is vaguely minimal, it's not generically minimal. And that also distinguishes it from all the other boxes.
Yeah.
But we all know this, but it's good to say it out loud.
More than just minimalism, isn't there this sort of idea that as people continue to live in, or increasingly live in virtual lives, that live virtual lives, will they just sort of lose the desire to have objects like that? Or are you also saying that we're sort of hardwired to?
I think there's a huge reversal happening, and I'm so excited about youth culture. All of the kids are going analog again, and it's the best thing I've ever seen. Number one, they're fascinated by fax machines. I was like, oh, that's actually, we could have left that one behind, actually.
Right.
They're doing landline, so they find it charming that you're tethered somewhere. And then I just wish that there were still, Fry's electronics all over the place so that they could buy the 30-foot cord that I bought so that I could make it into the bathroom and go down the hallway and then come back to my bedroom when I was having my chit-chat. But they love analog.
Okay.
I just found there's a new camera, because the vanity that comes with selfie culture is also so devastating, and like just the psychological stuff that comes with it. There's digital point and shoot, like just the disposable cameras. They're not actually disposable now. You can take a picture, you take as many as you want. You still have to do the wind up. It doesn't do anything. I think it just resets the trigger.
What a great sound.
What a great sound.
right.
It's very satisfying. And it stops at some point. And that's how you know you can click for a new picture. You just have to wait a day, and then they show up in the app and you can download them. So it's still fairly
Interesting.
convenient, because as it turns out, I just developed a 36 shot roll of film, and it was $25. I was like, this is actually a hobby now. Okay. We've gone all the way back, and photography is expensive again. So anyway.
Makes you much more intentional in the
Oh my
images you
goodness!
choose.
100%. Which is not to say that I don't regret a few of them, anyways. But anyway, it's an interesting thing that there are all of these different ways for us to be able to reconnect the digital world back to physical presence. And the cool thing about the sort of the point and shoot digital thing, even if you could take 1 million photos, one, the rolling of the thumb slows you down. And two, you can't see what you shot until the next day. So who cares? You capture the moment, and then you put your stupid phone down, and you can put your stupid camera down, and you have a conversation. Because I think, one of the delights of even just being here with you all, surrounded in this physical world, is you could be describing this box and the sinuous nature of it, that it feels like satin, and then Jerry backing it up with the fact that you also agree that it feels like satin. And I can just close my eyes and picture the thing,
Well, I was in the Strand on Sunday looking for a book, which I found, which is so satisfying when you find a book you really want. It was packed with people, and I thought, and a lot of them were young, most of them, and I thought, oh, this is so great. People are reading books. They're buying books and reading them. And to your point, I'm not going to give it away, but Jerry is working on a project for our art issue coming up in April that directly addresses what you just described. I'm not going to give it away, Jerry, because people have to buy that issue.
We haven't really asked about your object. Wendy has alluded to it a bit. And in fact, it to me is a symbol of mortality. And we'd love to hear a little bit about why this object is the thing you desire.
It's true. I hadn't thought of that in my head. I was listening to Wendy, being inspired by it. In 1994, the inventor of how we all live today, Donald Judd, the sculptor, architect, writer, amazing mind, died of lymphoma. We will never know Donald Judd's late work, which, like Warhol, they die relatively young, in their late 50s or very early 60s. And I'm 74, and now when I look at obits, I go, oh, that's young. No. You want to live much longer. But in that case, Judd died at prime time, I suppose. And Roberta was very, very close to the Judd family. Very. She babysat for the children.
Oh, well, Roberta Smith.
Roberta Smith is my wife. She's the ex-co-chief art critic of the New York Times. And she just retired a couple of Aprils ago. Anyway, the kids invited Roberta and I down to Marfa, Texas. Do all of our listeners know what Marfa is, do you think?
I think they can Google it, but if you want to tell, I'd love to hear you describe it.
Donald Judd so hated what the New York art world had become, that it had been corrupted by fame and money and busyness. This is in the 80s he had. And like all artists, they love money. If you look at most artists' letters to friends and to dealers, they're always going, I could use $100. They never stop carping about money because they have a habit where they have to inject all of the money in order to output all of their work. So anyway, Judd managed to get a lot of money out of the D. Manils, and he basically transformed a dead cow town in southwestern Texas of Marfa into this thing. He bought all these buildings, farm, land. Anyway, he put up the work of his friends. Roberta and I were invited to go down to Marfa. It was completely sleepy, a dead town, depression style almost. No, all the storefronts closed. The children offered us a prime, large house on the land for $5,000. But that was too much money, even in 1994, to possibly imagine spending. And we said, well, no, of course not. They also allowed Roberta and I to spend a week in his studio on the floor, sleeping they gave us open access. And that is also a story in itself. But most important, they allowed us to use his own private ranch about an hour and a half south of this already very, very southern location. Have you guys been to Marfa?
I haven't.
No, never.
Just seen the photos.
I know. I can't wait to go.
Led by Jerry and Roberta.
Even if you hate Donald Judd, and they're just squares and rectangles, and so what? That's true, but I highly recommend it. Anyway, they allowed us to use the ranch. We did. It's really on the border of Mexico. It never rains there. It never snows. There's no humidity. And one day we were walking out in this desert, and my whole life I've wanted to find several objects. And one of them I saw off in the distance as we were driving. And I went, what is that, a cow skull? Is there a steer? And I walked to it, and it was this horse's skull. In some ways, I love it because it has never been touched by human hands, but is obviously very formed and has a perfection that is so far beyond me. I'm not a horse person. I like them.
Yeah.
They say if you breathe in their nostrils, they'll follow you anywhere. They don't.
You tried.
Cows, which I love. Looking at cows is like having an aquarium. I've lived in a place where there are herds of cows, and just watching them move around, they barely move.
Yeah.
And it's fabulous. The horse, I don't know. They're big.
I had an art writer once say to me, never assign a story on cow art because nobody wants to look at cow art. It's so depressing.
What?
It's always stuck with
I
me.
collect cows.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm like, I understand, Jerry. I really do.
I've got to set myself free of that
Wow.
notion here and now.
Yeah.
It's important to mention the year, 1994 again. This is before all of us witnessed annihilation of the two largest things on the face of the earth on September 11th, 2001. We saw something that no human being before us has ever seen, the vaporization of man-made objects. I was able to put that horse's skull, which still had some flesh and rotten stuff on it, into my suitcase, wrap it in a whole bunch of plastic, and walk on the plane in Marfa and fly to Dallas, and fly from Dallas to Chicago, where I then had a teaching job. And then from Chicago, I flew to Providence, Rhode Island, where I then had a teaching job, all the while carrying this bag. No one said anything. And then I flew to LaGuardia the next day. All of that memory is embedded there. And the getting to the source that Wendy is talking about, I also believe that all of us go so far back, way before cave paintings, where you look at caves and you see, what are the most common paintings you see in caves?
Animals.
Well, hand paintings,
Hands
right?
are the second most, and how they made them. Our stupid artists never think to do this now. They picked up like pulp and binders and liquid and went and blew around their hand,
Right.
pulled their hands away, and those were the first photographs, right?
Oh, right.
That's me. I was here, but I'm also here. I exist there, and that's a memory, a shadow of me. And we've now examined all of the found handprints, all of them, and it was so obvious always that 51% of those hands, of course, belong to women. 51% of the artists in the caves were women.
How do you know that?
The size and the structure of the hands
Interesting.
proves that they are women.
Wow.
The paintings were in caves. This made me think of this lousy skull. Took me all the way back there. The paintings, we only have 1% of 1% of 1% of 1% of all the cave paintings that have ever been made. And we have that many percent of the caves that they were painted in. Because once they're discovered, they must exist between 2 degrees is all they can ever vary of temperature before the paint will be contaminated and destroyed. And so the minute we discover a cave, we tend to destroy them. The point is, this kind of painting had been going on for tens and tens of thousands of years. And before that, to end this stupid diatribe, you've all seen hand stone axes carved 1 million years ago by Neanderthal. What happens on the Neanderthal thing is those are made by various tools that were traded as they would walk from place to place twice a year on their hunting, mostly fishing forays. And they would trade, I've got pigment, you've got flint. You've got this, I've got that. And they would trade. Their hand stone axes are made with non-indigenous tools and materials, and we're finding traces of paint on them now. That tells us they were decorated.
Amazing. Amazing.
And looking at that skull, I was taken to some dramatic halfway point in my own life and the life of our species and the life of life. and it's just a skull. The only other thing I thought of bringing is when I saw Robert Smithson's spiral jetty that had been in the Great Salt Lake, made in, I think, 1974. A great thing that went like that. It went underwater for like a decade or two, then it was above, then it went below, now it's above. I took a little stone and I labeled it Detail Spiral Jetty. I almost brought that this morning.
You took it from the spiral jetty?
Yeah.
Sherry, I wouldn't admit that.
Do we have to erase this?
You disturbed a work of art.
It's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. It's like those people that used to take parts of the Parthenon.
Yeah, well,
okay, listen,
oh my God.
people listening to this, Jerry Saltz can do that. Nobody else can do that. So
I guess that's true.
Anyway, that's my long story. But I think for all of us, especially for design people, every object is potentially supercharged. Yeah. And all we have to do is get very quiet inside, or it hits you like a thunderbolt.
Yeah.
I love the story about acquiring a horse's head, but tell me two things. What is its physical appeal to you? And also I'd love to know how you live with it and how it speaks in your New York City apartment.
Roberta and I are very fortunate. We live in Greenwich Village. We joined 2 apartments together, which essentially means we're living in our summer house all year long. And we don't go anywhere. We rent a house in Connecticut. And we live there with tens of thousands of books. I've posted our stupid house on my Instagram. All I have is books. It's the only thing I own. And I clear off spaces on the shelves for little altars of objects that I love. And I've been in Wendy's home. Somebody should do a story on her home. Just this wall, that object. And I
have to interrupt to say we did a story a few years ago on Wendy's home and Tony Goodman's home, her sister's home. And
you did?
We did, and it's one of the most...
They're so different.
But also,
I imagine.
But also the DNA
is sort of there.
So we can, we'll put a link at the end of this podcast, and I'll send you a link to the story.
Please.
Yeah. But we haven't gotten into your new home. So anyway, continue.
So it just lives on a shelf, and I forgot the first part of the question.
Why is it beautiful to you? Why, when you saw it across...
Why is anything beautiful to us? I don't know. I think it speaks to us in a voice as if made by human hands, where I'd have to imagine that form of design, of sculpture, of art, of, again, presence, and also its absence. You know, what had been living in this. It's why we pick up seashells, obviously. Something was alive in here, and yet I love its, exoskeleton, and I don't understand this form of life. All of that echoes my experience and all of our experience with art, and I suppose design. I have it primarily through art, and in that case, primarily through painting. That's my main... that's what puts the fix on me.
It's the visceral kind of response.
Yeah, everything in the painting is unreal. Absolutely. These are the borders. Everything outside the border is real. Everything inside, I made this up. I'm a smelly shaman living on the edge of a village. Like, nobody has any use for what I make, but I'm convinced the world needs what I make. And all I need from you is your money. And they convince us.
To learn more about our guests, their objects, and First Stoops, a leading online marketplace connecting design lovers with sellers and makers from around the world, please head to the description for links. Sort of segueing back to your box. I mean, I think there's something sort of primordial about that. In a way, one is black, one is white, but they're both sort of these incredible organic forms, really textural.
Listening to Jerry, I mean, I'm reminded that my obsession also is collecting rocks wherever I go. And one of the tragedies, if I may say, is that I found a rock on the beach in I think East Hampton. So it was came from the ocean. And this rock literally, which I gave away, okay? And I didn't even take a photograph of it before I gave it away. I am so stupid. But anyway, this rock, the shape of it was completely round, kind of like it was like an oval. But it was gray, and it had circles on all the outside, exactly the same circles. And I thought, okay, how could this have been made by nature? How? It was not made by man, because the white in the rock was part of another rock. But how did that happen? Anyway, my obsession with rocks that I've collected in Scotland and in Greece and in blah, 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 is, again, this thing getting back to the source, because those rocks, I don't know how old they are, but they could be millions of years old, because I never believe how old this earth is that we're living on. And I'm somehow compelled to get down to the source. It just keeps leading me someplace, and I'll never get to the source. But I think as much as I can, it's about collecting rocks, holding them. It's about, whatever.
Wood.
Yeah, wood. Yeah. Bone, exactly. Yeah.
You also have a phenomenal collection of sort of outsider folk art.
Yeah.
Where does that fit in?
Well, both my parents were artists, and both my parents had, they were incredibly authentic. The things that they had in our house were useful and beautiful. But my mother was so practical and so brilliant that they were always intriguing, and they had a great library. So I think that, I think objects and practicality sort of, it comes from your childhood a lot, I think, what you were exposed to.
In my case, I was raised in the suburbs of Chicago, and I hated my parents, and we had no art whatsoever in our house. We had a French oil painting, a kind of faux impressionist painting, and a modernist Brancusi bird.
Yeah.
And we lived in, suburban furniture and, all of that. And I think I just wanted something that I wasn't supposed to have somehow. And there's a forbiddenness to it. There's I noticed that the kids in my high school that were having sex were either the theater kids or the art kids.
Interesting.
And I thought, I've got to do one of them. Because they obviously don't have the vibe. I could tell that even then, it was pathetic. I would beg. And so I turned to art.
Talk about desire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you turned
I
to art.
started as an artist.
Yeah.
Did you start as a designer or a
God,
maker?
No. I was going to be an actor, okay?
Huh?
That's
And
an
I
artist.
was
That's art.
intrigued by, my curiosity to find out how people live, why they live the way they do, is, I think, acting. I wanted to get deep within the character, find out, why do people behave the way they do?
Yeah.
I'm just so interested and curious about people's behavior. And I think their homes exhibit behavior, ultimately.
Or at least the absence of, right? I also grew up in the suburbs of Los Angeles, no art. And also nothing was allowed to adhere to the walls whatsoever because it was an investment, At some point I had this genius idea I'd seen in a book that people were tenting their ceilings. And so I had $5 and I bought blue plastic wrap cellophane that you would use to wrap your sandwiches in delightful cerulean. And I thought I could drape them on the ceiling and sort of tack them with Scotch tape. It was a mess. As it turns out, cling wrap is clingy and it clings to itself and not your ceiling. Right. So that was a terrible disaster. But it's funny,
But you were a designer then.
Trying, yeah.
You were a
But
nascent.
that instinct is what's so
I
important.
think there's something there,
Yeah.
right? As far as
Yeah.
each of us as individual sources,
That
all of our
is.
stuff comes from somewhere.
What did you
What's
do? You must have done something.
As a kid, it's interesting. I've talked a lot about the fact that I had two grandparents, one who lived in a modernist house, one who lived in this sort of tumble-down old house. And I just responded to the old house. I loved the smell of mildew. I loved the old bound books. I loved things that seem to be dusty and tattered. And I still, think that's I was formed early. So it's interesting, though. Like, I was exposed to two things, and I just, for whatever reason, gravitated one way. You were exposed to something that formed you. You two both lacked that exposure, and yet somehow you found your way to beauty, aesthetics, things. So, we're not necessarily formed. We are formed by our childhoods, but not necessarily. You can still grow to appreciate art.
Oh, sure.
Even
I
if you
love a
haven't.
late bloomer story.
I started as an artist, and I failed as an artist. When I moved to New York, I had what I call a walking nervous breakdown, and exiled myself from the art world. And I've written about this, and you can read it in my books. I trained myself to be a writer, and I couldn't understand any writing. And to this day, I barely can understand our school newspaper, Art Forum. Do you read it? It's beautiful. It's a great object, but my God, I can't figure out what they're saying. And I think that helped form my writing aesthetic.
Sometimes coming out from the outside is actually an advantage.
But also, that's so interesting because I failed as an actor. And not only did I fail, I was so frightened of the kind of life I knew I would have to live, which I couldn't live. So my failure at that led me to where I was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting because I think failure is so important as a tool. If you can bear the how hard it is, just to work through it. Because if you keep going, you can be led to where you're supposed to be.
We're going to do a podcast, Wendy, called "What Did You Fail?"
Right.
We'll just ask people,
Yeah, because it's really important.
Where didn't you end up?
Right.
And how did it bring you exactly where you needed to be?
I failed architecture school.
Did you?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at earlier.
Architecture school is terrible because you're not just writing a paper and giving it to your professor who's stamping an F on it. You're standing in front of your work. They're importing critics from around the world to tell you that you are a failure. So it's a very public sort of, if you're not good at it. But I used both the experience of the failure, but also the experience of having done it and tried to do it. And now I wasn't a design editor for most of my career, but now I edit a design magazine.
What are the big mistakes that writers make? I'd love to know our problem.
I'm learning. I learn with every story I write. My editor points out things.
And you learn from that.
Yeah, and I do learn from it. And I also think, okay, because my mother also, oddly, was a wonderful writer. And so I learned from her how to, I tend to I don't know, be very flowery sometimes. And it's just that's not what you should be doing. Yeah.
I think the greatest gift I had as a young writer was an editor who would sort of meticulously mark up my entire transcript and explain what was wrong and not necessarily give me the correct the solution, but just have me look at it and understand that it was wrong and I needed to say it in a different way. And that's, as an editor now, that's incredibly time-consuming. It's much easier just to, rewrite it yourself.
Right.
But I learned how to be a writer because I had an editor, John Cantrell, I'll name him, who devoted a lot of time to teach me how to be a writer. I had the innate, ear for language and storytelling, but I did not know how to do the construct a sentence that wasn't, a Henry Jamesian, clause after clause after clause after clause, half a page sentence.
Right.
Well, I'm surprised to hear, Wendy, that you would say that you're too flowery, or maybe the first draft is too much, and then the version that we get is the version that you're pleased with. I don't think either of you writes in a way that is too much of anything except the good stuff, right? It's all very real and human and digestible so that you can get to the stuff of it. And I appreciate that myself a lot. Jerry, I was reading your How to Be an Artist, and honestly, it was tough for me because as a person who is too perfectionist about things, I'm a chicken, and I don't just get brave and do the work sometimes.
Are you a baby? As Jerry would say, are you a baby?
Don't be a baby.
Don't be a baby.
Sometimes I'm a stupid baby. Yeah. But it's
true.
very inspiring when you can kind of just cut through and get to the meat of it, you know? And I think that's really important. It's not just how you say it, but it's what you're saying. And
Well
you know?
said. I
Yeah.
used to
Yeah.
have an editor, David Wallace Wells, who would take my work and make it get bigger and bigger and bigger and longer. And he would say, let's really dive into this one. And and I would go, yeah. And then he left for the New York Times, and I got another editor, equally great, named Ryu Spaeth, who would take these long texts that I would write and make them this long, like 700 words from 1,300 words. And I don't know about you writers, but I always read the version of the story in the final version. I don't look at the edited version. And I reread what he wrote, and I went, looks good to me. And I accepted every change. And so...
We both now share an editor who is fantastic,
That's
Eric
true.
Mazza. Actually, this morning, because I'm closing a story, I tend to get very protective of the people I'm writing about, to the point where Eric's pointing out to me that, Wendy, anyway. And
More.
But I realize that I am so lucky to have Eric and so lucky to have had the great editors I've had, because they really help you work and help you tell your story, even if you think, no, you're not. They're helping you, and they're smarter than you. I mean, Eric's, he's smarter than I am, so he can tell me these things, and I have to swallow it. I have to just take it.
Okay, but beyond the craft of what you two do as writers, I think what is most fascinating to me about you both is the subject matter you choose to focus on. So maybe you can each talk us through what you gravitate toward, what stories you like to tell.
I have a very simple rule when I scout. If I go into a space and it's not immediately telling me a story, and that story is who lives there, what do they love, what don't they love, how do they keep the house, what does it mean to them to have, messy, so whatever. If there's no storytelling, I'm out, because I realize that when I came from Condé Nast, House and Garden, decorating magazines, blah, 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 and I realized when I got to New York Magazine, okay, it's not about decorators. It's not about decorating as an end in itself. It's about decorating as a byproduct of a passion and storytelling. And I thought, I need to find the stories of the city that reflect the people in the city, because I couldn't actually compete. One thing was I couldn't compete with shelter magazines. Peter Marino was not going to give me his new apartment $50 billion. We weren't going to get it. But I thought, okay, so I figured out where I could go to entice our readers, entertain our readers, educate our readers, and myself at the same time. Because you have to know your audience, and you have to know where you are. Our magazine is a really special magazine. It's a culture, political, news read. So I had to adjust. And I it's what I love the most, going into an outlier space. And I've been really lucky that our editors, Adam Moss and now David Haskell, go, yeah, that's a good story. Because guess what? Other magazines would have said, Wendy, are you kidding me that you're showing this? So I've been really lucky.
And you, Jerry?
In my case, I think first it was just finding my own voice. That, again, I come from a world that protects itself or loves jargon. And I knew that would not work for me because I couldn't understand it. And I don't like reading it. I also understood listen, when I first I wrote this on my Instagram this morning, when I first became the art critic for the Village Voice in 1997, at that time, I had been teaching in all those schools that I had mentioned earlier, driving a local truck, driving a wealthy person around in her limousine, a Mercedes, which I once stole, and I brought to the East Hampton beach, and the car was totaled.
Oh, no.
But the person who totaled it left their name and their phone number on it, and I had the whole car repaired before she came back here from Dallas.
Amazing story.
And when I picked her up from the airport, I went, Laura, I totaled your car. I told her anyway. I don't know why.
And
she was fine. She said, well, looks good to me. How the hell did I get back there?
I think, is that a story you've ever confessed to anyone before?
Yeah, no, I tell all of this stuff now just to show that we all are very similar.
Yeah.
We're all just cobbling this together, learning on the job. You find your own voice. I am not the best art critic. I'm aware of that. I'm probably the 13th best or the 16th best. But I wanted to be the most read art critic, and I think I can say I'm that. Although, just to jump from something Wendy was saying, I've noticed of late, I follow my numbers. I look at online, and I can track how long people looking at my page, how much they've read. I get
This
a
is
good
your
idea.
New York Magazine work.
In New York
Social.
Magazine. I can do it also on Instagram, but I'm talking about, anyway. So I can, and my editors concur. People are not reading as much. You're talking about kids are re-embracing the analog. That's great. But people are not reading criticism as much anymore. And that means one of several things. The thing it means to me is I've got to find a way to keep eyes on the prize. I have to find a way to keep myself relevant, not being desperate, not being cloying or like gimmicky, because that's not my voice, although probably is. That's probably built into my character that I've created. That character is very vivacious, very type A personality, and Wendy knows this about me. I've never gone out to a dinner. I don't like going to parties. When I go to openings, I go home the second it's over. I'm very bashful, but I actually think all people are bashful. In any event, I'm left now trying to find a readaptation of our platforms into not podcasts for me, because podcasts is too much work. Oh my God. They offered me one. I went, no, I don't want to work that way. And working with people, that's hard. I don't want to talk to people in the morning. I was offered a lot of money to have a Substack. And I thought, too much work again.
Okay.
And also you have to then ask your followers for money. And I thought, I come from the world of free, where if you want me, I'm not asking anything in return, because the fact that you're looking at me, I'm getting what I want. Okay? So we're talking about ways of doing this online, of speaking about art. You're podcasting about it. La, 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 la. If you have any ideas, we're open.
First things first, you're rejecting the sort of jargon and being approachable, using approachable language, and being really sort of passionate, telling your stories from your own personal viewpoints is a way to connect with more people. I mean, the art world has been, and the design world to a certain extent too, has been very good about putting up, making it very inaccessible.
Yeah.
The sort of mystique
Right.
of this object, and that you have to sort of be part of a secret society to get in. We've seen it at First Dibs, where the galleries are sort of intrigued by the access that we could provide, but they want to be gatekeepers.
Right.
They don't want access. I mean, I think it's very exciting. That's one thing that I will say in the digital age. It's very exciting that the gates have opened up, and, which has meant taste has opened up. But I think it's imperative that there are great storytellers who will sort of contextualize it.
You know, the success of a magazine or of a store or of anything is point of view. You can't be all things to all people.
Right.
You must have a point of view,
Right.
and you must be passionate to reach out via that point of view. That's why our magazine is so great.
Right.
That's why you're so great. Also, Jerry can, which makes me so jealous, you can write the way you speak. So you immediately draw people in, and it's such a beautiful art, because when you're writing, I can hear you talking.
That's how I felt too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And it's just
I'm
such a
with the
gift.
same with your work.
No,
Yeah,
I think
think
it's
so
so
too.
different because, well, because it is. But I just think that if a writer can do that, you have such a magnetism with your audience. You can draw them in immediately, and I think that's one of your great gifts.
And they'll follow you to subjects they might
Yeah.
not necessarily be inclined to be
Definitely.
interested in.
And
Yeah.
that's the big power of it all, because truly people avoid things that make them feel stupid, and art makes people feel stupid,
Right.
especially if you don't intrinsically like the thing that
Right.
you're looking at, then there's no curiosity to be able to engage with why the piece was created that way, what were the choices, what is this being derived from, or what is it a reaction against.
Right.
If you don't have access by way of someone holding your hand and saying, it's okay that you don't get it, let's talk about it. Let me talk to you about it. You can read what I have to say. Then you're just going to avoid it and go to something that doesn't make you feel so idiotic or uneducated, you know? And I think that's the thing that I love. Like, I, to this day, reference that when the Met did the Alexander McQueen exhibit, the way that they, because it was, I mean, one of the most commercially successful fashion exhibitions of all
Right.
time.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's just because McQueen was McQueen, although that is, of course, a big part of it, that the substance of what was there. They started the exhibit. One, every single caption was written in plain English, and I appreciated that, especially for everyone else who wasn't already into fashion.
Right.
And then the first room that they took you into was the process. They showed the construction and the tailoring that he went through so
Yeah.
that you could see this was a suit. And then he started making it, you know, wild, and the volumes were different, and here's the construction.
I love that.
It was
Yeah,
so
it's brilliant.
important.
The
for-
installation was
Yes.
But
so
they
brilliant.
were also just incredibly dramatic,
Incredible.
you know,
Yes.
wow
Yeah.
Oh, for
moments
sure.
Yeah.
of display, which is
Yeah.
also, you need a little
Yeah.
bit of the wow
You
factor.
need some pizzazz,
Yeah.
you know, the editorialism of it all. But truly, I would watch other people in these, because I went a few times, I would watch people point out in the later rooms, oh, that's the thing that I saw, that's the shoulder, that's the same waistline. It was very cool. And
I
think,
agree.
you know, I think to allow the general public into the way that people who are versed in this world
Yeah.
think is the reason why we will be able to self-sustain, you know, optimistically. I'm being an optimist today.
It occurs to me, Wendy, I'd love to hear what you think of Jerry's horse head, and I'd love to hear, Jerry, what you think of
Oh, I'm so glad you
Wendy's
asked me
project.
that. I think Jerry's horse head is one of the most beautiful things ever because of the history, because of how you found it. I love that. But also because if you look, and I'm thinking so much of Georgia O'Keeffe, of course, the beauty of this skull, if you had an artist try to do that, and I think, again, Georgia O'Keeffe just kept hammering that home in her work, there is nothing as beautiful as nature. Nature just creates the most beautiful everything. And this planet is like a miracle. It's a miracle, a beauty. So that horse head to me is, I could look at that forever, because you'd always see new things, and you'd think about what the horse was doing and how old was the horse. I just think it's absolutely magnificent.
Okay, Jerry, you're...
What I really love about Wendy's object is, if I understand it, the box is not covered with any pigment or real finish,
No.
altering finish. And so what I am seeing is an object that's made out of itself, with no deception or illusionism built into it, no decoration per se built into it. I still remember when I asked her to look at it earlier, where I touched it in my hand, just very briefly, as much as just, grazing it. And I think you guys could remember it too. It has a great power to touch it, a very sensual, Like, how did this form? And like Wendy is saying, it's very man-made, but it's sort of a form of perfection. I love that it is small. And I was sort of embarrassed when I saw Wendy walk in with a little wrapped object, and I walked in with a big shopping bag with this like proto-big thing. And that's what made me want to bring in my detail of the spiral jetty. But I think that Wendy's object is so beautifully handmade that it looks like it was made by nature. It is gorgeous.
Oh, that's such a great
point. It's like
point.
a seashell.
Okay, so we've taken to ask our guests, sort of, our podcast is called Objects of Desire. So why do you each think we desire objects?
Well, I think it's because we need company. I would be so alone in a world with nothing except us. It'd be freaky.
I think it's storytelling. I think that I know, speaking for myself, I collect all these things because they all tell me stories. Memories, it's storytelling and it's memory.
I would like to ask us all a question. How are we with throwing things out?
Oh, that's another podcast. I think Marie Kondo podcast.
I could be ruthless.
Are you
That's all I'm
really
going to say.
amazing?
Okay, well,
I
you
could
can
come
teach
into
us.
your houses and clean out the whole damn thing.
But are you tossing
you would
it, or
shoot me.
are you going to consign it? Because I'm good with release.
Garbage.
I talk about releasing stuff,
Garbage.
back into the universe.
This is
Garbage.
this is, you can do that to yourself, but you can't do that to me. You have no right to
I'd
do
love
that to
to
me.
do it to you.
Because
just
you
gotta
do
let
not
'em
know
in.
what these things mean to me, or the stories, even if they are garbage.
Listen,
But I wish you would come. It would make my life so much
Yeah, you
simpler.
could come to my house, Jerry, and
I
just cheese it
can't
up.
even throw out a newspaper in our
really?
apartment without Roberta going, nope,
Yeah.
nope.
Okay,
I might
so
read
I
I
that
think
that.
every
8
household has
months
one of
later.
each.
Yeah.
Every household has one of each, I think. So my dad was the throwawayer. My mom was the pack rat. My husband is the person who retains a lot more sentimentality. Like atomically speaking, sentimentality has a longer half-life in his world than it does with me.
Yes.
Like for me, at some point it runs out.
That's
Oh.
true.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, it's fine. I got to get rid of this thing.
For
Yeah.
me, the longer I have it, the more attached I become
Oh,
to
wow.
it.
Yeah.
As I said, I love the smell of mildew, so I will
Yeah.
take.
I was
will
going to
live-
ask you
I
about
know
that
that.
off
I
I
script.
will
Yeah.
I will live with an object to its, as
Wow.
it's disintegrating,
Okay.
and then like keep the like remnants in a bowl to worship. Duh. Love that, and love the two of you even more than I did before you walked into this.
Thank you
space.
for having us. What a treat for us.
Me, ditto.
Yeah, really, thank you.
Amazing. All right.
Just the best.